Hi, I'm Pam, and I would like to welcome you to the Live Authentically show. My team and I help other people step into their authentic realities via a number of different modalities. This podcast is obviously one of them. I also have a Facebook group, and we can be found at liveauthentically.today/FB. It's a community of like-minded people committed to spiritual growth and transformation, and we would be delighted to have you join us. I'm also super pumped that I have just released my first book. It's called SOAR, S-O-A-R. It can be found at pamelasavino.com. It's also on Amazon. And it is a spiritual journey, an experiential account through a very transformative event in my life, and shows how I partnered with the universe to deliver me to a place of soaring. And I believe that this is something that everyone can do with a willingness to approach life in a new way, open-mindedness, creativity. You can totally redesign your life. So would love to have you take a peek at that. And on today's show, I am super pumped to have with me Kelly Barron. Kelly is a meditation practitioner and teacher at UCLA, and she is going to tell us today about her journey. So before we dive into everything about you and what you do on a daily basis, I would love to have you answer the same question that I start all of my shows off with. And that question is, what does it mean to you to live authentically every day?
Well, for me, I think it means living with some intentionality. So, that's on a practical level of how I set up my morning, how I enter into the day, and then at various parts of the day, really tying myself back to that intention. And that includes the transitions, before coming on to this podcast, setting an intention to be of service, to be present. That to me really keeps me aligned, and it's separate and distinct from mindfulness and meditation in a way, but that to me really helps me come from a place of authenticity and letting go of whatever happens, just knowing that that intention is my direction and guidance, and hopefully by virtue of setting that, I get to be my best self.
Absolutely. I love that. And when you talked about setting the intention at the beginning of each day, is it different? I mean, do you wake up and just kind of feel for inspiration, feel what can you tell me a little bit about how you receive the intention?
Yeah, sometimes it's about what I have going on that day. I'm a writer as well. So if I'm writing, I might intend to have creativity, ideas flow in my writing. I always have a component of being of service and allowing the best qualities of myself to show up for the day.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it might be around, simple behaviors. I intend to eat well, and
Yeah.
all of that might sound very silly on a micro level, but to me, it's a little bit like having an internal GPS. And it doesn't mean that I'll always be perfect, that I'll always do it. It's not a goal. An intention is really just a way of organizing your consciousness, organizing your thinking. And I find it's a little bit like a mental emotional talisman. So I can refer back to that. And it's just something that I find when I do in my day, I have a much better day. And I've done that fairly consistently. And it also keeps me, I think, tethered to an emotional currency that tends to be a little bit higher, because it's so easy to let the stress overwhelm us. It's so easy for us to kind of get off track. Sometimes I intend to have ease, and I tend to navigate through my day with a sense of ease, and having that intention really does land me in a different place when I do encounter, as we all do, different stressors throughout the day.
Absolutely. And I just think it's so important. I just wanted to echo the importance of that morning routine and setting the intention at the beginning of the day and waking up and being in that empowered place and that centered place, because it is just so easy to wake up in that frenzied state and all of a sudden start going through the motions of the day. And we always need something to anchor on. So I think it's so important to set that intention and approach the day with mindfulness, like you said, intentionality. Just being present, make it your mission to be present during the day and have something to anchor back on. I think that that's so important. So,
and to have some responsiveness, because, I know people who the first thing they do is they start looking at their emails. And that's
Right.
really putting you in a reactive mode. And so before you do anything, having some responsiveness and co-creating, curating, at least attitudinally, how you want to move through the day. Doesn't mean it always happens, but it
Right.
to me is a real, as you say, reference point.
Right. Exactly. Can you tell me a little bit about what your morning routine looks like?
Sure. Well, I start with a hot, cold shower. And there are a lot of reasons why I do that. It's funny, it's stuff that I don't normally share with people, but it's very helpful to move the lymph gland. It's helpful in regulating blood sugar. It is very alerting in a good way. So we know when we put cold water on the face, it stimulates the vagus nerve. And that's a nerve that runs through the brain, the heart, and the body, and really is a kind of a reflection of the overall health of the nervous system. So I might do 5 seconds of cold, 5 seconds of heat, and do 5 rounds of that with my morning shower. A little weird, but that works for me. I typically then do some gentle movement. So that might be qigong or mobility practices. I have a training certification and I'm a lifelong athlete, and I'm also kind of an aging athlete. So I take mobility really seriously. So a lot of moving through, you could do that with asanas. I do it with some hip openers, working with different parts of the body because I'm sitting quite a bit when I write or teach,
Mhm.
that help alleviate and counterbalance some of that. I spend some time setting some intentions. I'm also a fan of prayer. I have my own kind of secular way of praying. And then I tend to journal and set up kind of what my day might look like, a reflection that also might include what happened the day before. I also do some nourishing reading. Now that sounds like a lot, but I can kind of condense that if need be. You know, if my morning, like this morning, I had a 8:30 call, so I couldn't get through all of that, but I could certainly do the stretching, which I generally include some deep breathing along with that. I could certainly set the intention. I could certainly pray. The other stuff, maybe I'll get to, maybe I won't. But generally, that will take me about 45 minutes or so. And as we were talking earlier, that time to me is so well invested because I'm so much more at ease throughout the rest of the day. I'm generally more productive. And I have kind of a clean conscience that no matter what happens, I've kind of set up my day to unfold in a way that generally works.
I love that. And I would also like to echo the importance, like you just alluded to, flexibility, being flexible with your morning routine. If you've got a call or something, you've got to adapt. And I think that that's so important. I know a lot of times when people embark on spiritual practices, I know I felt victim to this. I felt like there was a certain way. I was very rigid in my practice. And I felt like, well, if this is my morning routine, this is what it should look like. Or if this is, I'm trying to work meditation in, this is what it should look like. And I think it's just so important to meet ourselves with compassion and grace and be flexible and adapt, and just realize that, our bodies, our minds will tell us what the most important things are. And they're incredibly intuitive, incredibly communicative, and it will help us. We have this amazing internal system that kind of helps us prioritize and helps us realize what we need in every moment.
Yeah, I think that's so important to bring in the kindness piece because we can agendize things. You know, it can be another way that we set ourselves up to fail, and so
Right.
holding it loosely, and then over time, it just becomes something you do. And it's just kind of baked into how you move in the world, and it's not onerous. It's actually joyous to have that level of practice, so to speak. But I'm 100% in agreement with having some kindness and flexibility because sometimes we are not in command of the scheduling of our day. And maybe we have a bad night's sleep and we wake up a little later. And it's better for us to get the extra time in bed sleeping than it would be to haul yourself out of bed and do everything you normally do. So yeah, flexibility is key.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that and those tips for the morning routine. I actually think I'm going to work in the hot cold shower because this is now the second person I've heard this from, and I feel like when I start hearing repeats, I feel like this is the universe telling me it's time to incorporate this. Pay attention. My business manager also does that as well. He starts every day off with the cold shower element, and
I would add that it is contraindicated if you have a heart condition or anything else, but certainly something to play with, and it is better than a cup of coffee in terms of really kind of getting your system going. So yeah, I would be curious to hear if you adapt that and how it goes for you.
yep, I'm going to give it a try. No time like the present. Tomorrow morning, it's starting. All right, well, let's dive into more about you and your history. I know you have a background as a journalist. So I would love to hear more about what you do on a daily basis to teach and practice mindfulness. But I always like to hear the chronology because I firmly believe that every single step in our journey is a stepping stone that brings us to where we are today. So can you just hit rewind and just take us back to the beginning, wherever you would like to start, and walk us through how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in kind of a achievement-oriented family, and so I was a competitive tennis player. I was academically kind of a go-getter, and I was very career-oriented. I'm 55 now, so this is, the 70s and the 80s, and I think a lot of women of that generation, we were really propelled into career mode rather than family mode. It was not something that a lot of my friends were thinking of. We wanted to go out and kind of shatter the glass ceiling and really embark on fairly substantial careers. And so my father was a journalist. I got sort of channeled into that and began as a print journalist really in the heyday of journalism, kind of the waning heyday, but it was a very exciting time to be doing that work, and I loved it. I worked at a lot of metropolitan papers, eventually ended up at Forbes magazine as a staff writer and associate editor. And while my career was really going well, what wasn't going well was my management of my stress. I had spent so many years achieving these goals, but not really looking at how that was taking a toll on my nervous system. I had quite a bit of anxiety, deep fear of failure. Mm-hmm. And it kind of coalesced at Forbes. Even though I was doing good work and I was excelling there, I began to look at ways to moderate the stress I was feeling. And I had a good friend who was a meditator. And this was in the early 90s, late 90s, I guess, when meditation was kind of strange. Mm-hmm. People were doing it, but it was a fringe activity. And yet she seemed to have a lot of grace, ease. She was clear. And she also had a deeply fulfilling life. At least that's how it appeared to me. She was not overwhelmed by stress. And yet she was productive and doing good work in the world. And so I started to meditate, and I went on some retreats. I began a daily practice. And the more and more I meditated, my body started to unwind. I had warehoused just a lot of stress in the body, so much so that the first time I sat, literally cross-legged, I could barely hold that position for 5 minutes. And my body was so bound up. And as that began to kind of unwind, of course, I began to feel a lot of emotions, some of which were very painful, but also some of which were guiding me to make decisions about how I wanted to move into the next phase of my life. So I ended up quitting Forbes really at the top of my career. It was a very dramatic move. But that led me to some deeper decisions about how I wanted to move forward in my life. I became a mom. I began freelance writing, and I began to pursue meditation for my own sake, but increasingly wanting to share that with others because I had reaped so much benefit from it. Not only did I get better at managing my stress, but my relationships got better. I became kinder. I became clearer in how I wanted to live my life. And so it was, in many ways, life-saving for me. And what's interesting now is my writing is really being informed by my mindfulness practice. It's sort of the reverse. At first, my journalism career informed my mindfulness practice. Now it's the other way around. So I feel I'm, to your point and your whole ethos with your podcast, I'm really authentically writing now through my own voice in a way about subjects that I care about. So then the teaching's really an outgrowth of that. There's a saying that teaching is a byproduct of your sincerity. And I'm very sincere in my personal practice. And so my teaching's a real desire to share those benefits with other people.
Let's talk about stress a little bit. I know that stress is something that we all feel in many shapes, something we all deal with in many, many ways and shapes and forms. And I think that sometimes we don't always realize how much stress we're carrying. So can you talk a little bit about the barometers, or kind of the, how can someone tell? It's obvious when we're under undue stress, we may experience certain feelings, but what are some physiological kind of markers that we could kind of look for and keep our eye out for, so that we can proactively recognize when our bodies are under a lot of stress and do something about it?
And I like that you're focusing on the body, because fundamentally the stress response is housed in the body. When we are alerted to a threat, historically that was a physical threat, but now we don't have as many physical threats, although you could argue we still do. But we have a lot of psychological and social threats. So the body interprets that threat. The brain releases chemicals, cortisol, epinephrine, neophrine, and those flood the system to create a reaction in the body that helps keep us safe, that protects us. So you might find that your heart beats faster. There's a logic in that and an elegance in that. It's beating faster to pump blood through the body to the large muscles so that you can run. You might have sweaty palms, which again is a way of aerating the system, cooling it down. You might have some nausea. That too is very purposeful. It's not a good time to eat if you have to flee the scene of, in our ancestral time, maybe it was a saber-toothed tiger. So all of the body's orchestration to these symptoms that feel very uncomfortable are very purposeful and helpful, but they don't feel so good. So we might have those physiological symptoms alerting us that, wow, we're really in an activated state. Mm-hmm. One of the things that happens is that state can happen over time and it gets compounded. And I want to say that not all stress is bad. There's a very healthy level of stress and even anxiety that helps us perform, helps us meet deadlines, helps us do our best work. So there's a really good component of stress, which we might call eustress. It's where we are on this curve. It's kind of a bell curve. We rise up, and on that rising part of the curve, that's where we're getting a lot of performance enhancement through the adrenaline that's moving through our body. Athletes, performers really can be trained to use this to help them. Even kids that I teach to take a test. When we reframe that stress and say, wow, my body's getting me ready to perform, this is helping me, that can be very catalytic to enhancing performance. But what happens is we miss that cue, we come up that curve, and then we fall down the other side into de-stress. Mm-hmm. And that's where we have stress that becomes more of a chronic condition when it's not managed. And this is where mindfulness can be so helpful, because if we're alerted to those physiological symptoms, we have a moment in time where we can intervene and begin to use different practices to kind of temper that stress, but also on a higher level, make choices that might be more beneficial for managing that chronic stress. For example, for me, it frankly was quitting a job that I found was too much for my nervous system at that point in time and becoming unaligned with my values. And by the way, I love Forbes and I love my time there. I love journalism. But at that time in my life, I had gotten way out of balance. And so that was a major course correct that was informed by my mindfulness of not only what was happening in the body, but this higher level mindfulness of around what my values were, how I was not being fulfilled in some ways. And so that can lead us to make very bold changes, but it can also lead us to make very simple changes in the moment, which would be stopping and taking 3 breaths in, oxygenating the system, dropping our shoulders, loosening the muscles in our face, standing up from the computer, going for a walk. So, mindfulness is really allows you to pollinate so many ways of responding in the moment, and then longer range decisions that you can make to alter your life so that you're not under this constant force of distress. And also so that you're recognizing when stress might be helpful for you, when it can be productive.
Yeah, and it can be motivating. I totally agree with that, and I've experienced that. But I just think it's so important that we, that we realize that we realize when our bodies are getting stressed out acutely and incorporate more practices in a proactive way into our life. So let's review those. What are some go-to? Do you have like a list? I know you just mentioned a few, but if you could name, 5 go-to mechanisms that people can incorporate into their life kind of in a gradual way to incorporate mindfulness, what would those be?
Yeah, so I think we can talk about it tactically, like what to do in the moment, and then how you build a longer term practice to support yourself, both in terms of awareness and in regulating your nervous system. I think tactically, one of the best things you can do is called a stop practice. And stop is actually an acronym where you're stopping what you're doing. That's the S in it. You're
Mhm.
taking a breath. So just one full breath in is enough to really kind of slow your system down. That's the T in the stop. You're observing. So in that observation, you might be noticing, wow, my heart rate's up. Or, oh, I'm having a lot of critical thoughts here. You're just pulling the lens out a little bit and observing. You might be observing what's around you. Maybe you're hearing sounds. And then you're proceeding. And that can be done very quickly. In fact, a lot of students I have do that in the car at a stop sign. It's literal. I think one of the hardest things about mindfulness is actually remembering to do it. So having an acronym like that and a simple practice can be very, very helpful. I think taking 3 full breaths in, which is maybe more of a mindfulness based practice, because when we officially or formally practice mindfulness, we're not manipulating the breath. But when we stop and really take 3 breaths in, that too can really shift your state. And in fact, we know that the breath is a very fundamental way that we oxygenate the system, that we regulate different patterns in the body. Sometimes, however, the breath might not be available to people. So I think feeling your feet,
Mhm.
standing in line and maybe feeling your feet and rocking gently from one foot to the other, kind of shifting, keeping your attention in the soles of your feet. There's something that's happening with the vestibular system when you walk back and forth. Also, planting your attention in your feet can be grounding literally, but also the feet are a place in the body that are more neutral. So we might have a lot of agitation in the central core of the body, certainly with anxiety. So when we can mindfully shift our attention to the feet or the hands, it's actually giving us a little bit of resting place within the body so we can begin to unwind some of the agitation of the stress that we might be feeling. It also helps us shift our mind away from some of the thoughts that might be worrisome to us. So stop practice, 3 breaths, taking time to feel your feet, very simple things that you can do throughout the day, many times throughout the day.
Yeah, so simple yet so powerful. I know for myself, when I start feeling stressed, sometimes I'm just taking super, super shallow breaths and I don't even realize it. I'm just super tense. And I do have to stop and remind myself and just mindfully just take deep breaths. And I feel like I'm just totally transformed. I mean, it's so simple and it's something that's generally available to all of us. And it just can take you to a very stressed place, into a state of peace and empowerment. And I know for me, it helps me respond differently. It helps me respond in better and healthier ways rather than reacting, right? Because when we're tense, we just have a tendency to react, right? We just, without even thinking sometimes. And I love this acronym, this process that you just taught us, because it just helps us to calm and respond rather than react.
Yeah, he's a great pianist of the 21st century, Victor Rubinstein, I think his name was, who I remember reading a story about how a journalist was going to interview him, and he was quite frail at this point, and so she knew that she wouldn't have a lot of time with him. And so she said, I'm just going to boil my question down to one. And so she said to him, Mr. Rubinstein, what makes your music sound so great? And he said, oh, that's easy. It's not the notes. It's the pauses between the notes that makes my music so wonderful. And
I love that.
so I think it's this ability to pause, and notice what's happening in your body. You mentioned the shallowness of breathing, which I think is really important, because a lot of times, particularly when we're sitting in front of the computer, we're not fully breathing. And we also tend to brace quite a bit in our core. So just even softening the belly and having your breath move down and through and into the body can be very, very helpful. So the body is always sending us signals. It has a language all of its own, and it communicates to us through sensation. And we can really connect with that to know not only what we are feeling, but what we can do to respond and help ourselves in that moment.
Yeah, so important. And so is this process you just described, is that what you use to deal with stress, like acute stress in the moment? Or is that also used in a practice to kind of manage generalized stress as well on a longer term basis?
It's an and both. So I have a formal sitting practice where I might meditate each day. That provides the framework for me to develop awareness that carries over into the day. It also helps me regulate my nervous system and have a deep period of time of stillness and just being. We're constantly doing. So it's nice to have that sort of physiological reminder that we can enter into different states. So that performs or provides sort of the baseline of what I do. And then throughout the day, I'm doing daily life practice. Some of it might be to manage an acute moment of stress, but some of it might just be bringing more presence into my daily life. So we're doing a lot of hand washing now, for example. So
Mhm.
I try to be aware when I'm washing my hands of feeling the soap on my hands, the slickness of the water and the suds, the warmth of the water, the rubbing of the hands together, the visual aspect of the bubbles, just bringing my full attention to that sensory experience. So we can transport mindfulness into our day by bringing attention to moments where we're engaged in activity. Hand washing is a good one because we're all doing that a lot now. And it's a really wonderful way to make a practice kind of extraordinary, take an
Yeah.
ordinary moment and make it extraordinary through our attention. It can be quite pleasant to do that. And then it's also very practical. So finding these little periods in your day where you can infuse a little bit of mindfulness creates continuity between a formal practice and an informal one. Also, a lot of people in office environments, they're taking breaks, not so much now because they're working at home, but standing up and walking to the bathroom or into the kitchen, you can be aware of your footsteps, aware of the movement of your body. So mindful walking is another great way to bring that awareness into the moment and bridge this practice that you might do more formally, or if it's even just setting the intentions in the morning and then just bringing some presence throughout the day. Short times, many times is a great axiom for that.
Okay, I love that. I'd love to expand on this a little bit because I just think this is so powerful. I think some people, and I know myself included, when I first started to explore and step into the world of meditation and mindfulness, it was sometimes hard for me to really crystallize how I could incorporate it into my day. So I love the example that you gave about hand washing, about making it an experience, a sensory experience. Can you give a few more examples? Especially, I think it's so helpful and so powerful, especially for so many people who are spending so much time at home now. We're just on autopilot, just doing things around the house, not really thinking about them. So what are other ways that we can incorporate mindfulness into basic everyday activities?
I think looking at the activities that you already do that are benchmarks in your day and bringing more deliberate attention and intention to them is a great way of choosing some spots for yourself to begin to practice. For example, chores are a really great way to bring mindfulness into your day. You're already doing them, so why not do them with just a little bit more deliberateness? I had a student, for example, who had chronic pain, and one of the ways she worked with the chronic pain was to shift her attention outside of the body into an activity. So she would unload the dishwasher very mindfully. She would pick up the plate, feel the weight and coolness of it in her hand. She would enjoy how the dishes sparkled, the light that shone through the glasses, the coolness of the fork as she put it in the drawer, even the clanking of the plates and the noise that it made. And this became such a fixture in her day that if anyone volunteered to do it, she would get up from the table saying, no, I'm going to do it. It's all for me. Don't unload the dishwasher. And what she was doing was also giving her this profound rest from the attention that she was devoting to her pain, which also came with a lot of rumination as well as physical sensation. So
Mhm.
that was, I thought, a really brilliant example that she developed over time, a practice. And to be honest, Pam, if that's all you did in your life, that would be enough. because that's pretty profound in terms of how she was able to give herself some relief, but also bring some joy into a task that wasn't so joyful.
Right.
Another thing I might mention is for parents, there are a lot of ways that you can incorporate mindful practice together into the rituals that you do together. For example, for many years when my daughter was younger, we had a practice before bed that I would use to tuck her in, which was a 5-finger gratitude practice. So I would hold my hand up and she would move my thumb down and I would say, I'm grateful for you. Or then she would move another finger down. I say, I'm grateful for the warm weather we had today. Whatever came to mind. I'm grateful for our cat, Peter. I'm grateful for my friends. I'm grateful for the house. But she would bend the fingers down. Then she would hold up her hand. I would bend the fingers down as she said something that she was grateful for. And there's a lot happening in that interaction. There's, of course, connection. We're titrating, we're kind of regulating, co-regulating our nervous system. Sometimes we would be looking into each other's eyes. There's some touch there. Mm-hmm. And there's also a lot of mindfulness in terms of calling forth positive emotions and making that a practice. And yet it was not called mindfulness. It was not fraught. It was just dropped into our bedtime routine. And sometimes we would forget, but a lot of the times we'd remember. And so I think, again, looking at your daily routine, looking at places where you naturally pause. A lot of families don't have dinner time together anymore. But that too, if you are sitting down at dinner, we had a practice in our family, and we still do, what was your rose today and what was your thorn? Which was a way of just connecting with a great moment and one that you maybe were challenged by, and opening up the conversation around the dinner table with some intentionality. So again, just looking at the places where you naturally pause and bringing some sense of ritual in a very secular way that has some presence and connection and some practice to it.
Those are just beautiful, beautiful examples you've shared. Thank you. And I know I can totally relate to the dinner time example. That is one of the silver linings that we've been able to enjoy in this quarantine is family dinner time. I mean, admittedly, I've got 4 kids. We're going in a million different directions. I'm playing unpaid Uber driver, just kind of dropping off, picking up. And, the family dinner has kind of gone by the wayside, but we've been able to reinstitute that during the quarantine. And that is something that's going to stay. It's obviously not going to stay every single night because activities will resume over time. But we would go around the table and share stories. And those moments of connection were so beautiful. We would share our highs from the day, lows from the day, and other people would weigh in on, what's a different way you could have handled that, or here's a different way you could navigate that challenge next time. And it was just such a beautiful practice and definitely something that we want to continue. So I would like to echo the importance of instilling that mindfulness and just living in the moment. It just dialed us all back to the present moment, just what was in front of us right here today. Gratitude is such a huge piece of it. When you talked about the dishwasher example, I chuckled because, whoever is like arguing about, I want to be the one to unload the dishwasher. Usually in my house, when the dishwasher needs to be unloaded, everybody kind of scrams. But there is a way to incorporate gratitude into every situation, no matter how painful it is, no matter how challenging it is. And that's when we shift into gratitude, it brings us to a completely different space. And the laws of the universe, this is when we're in that place of gratitude, that's how we attract more, where those higher vibrations of joy and appreciation and gratitude and peace. And that's the space from which we should always be aiming to operate.
I'll also just, offer a reframing of chores. When you're on retreat, you always have a work meditation, and there's a longstanding practice in Zen tradition to enfold mindfulness into work. And I think there's a lot of mental hygiene in cleaning. Our world now and our days are so amorphous. Our work is blending into our home life, and yet, and sometimes we don't have a sense of agency in terms of what we're accomplishing. But when you sweep the floor, you have an immediate reward from that action. When you make the bed, you have an immediate reward from that action. And I've looked cleaning as a refuge. It's maybe not for everyone, but I think there's a way you can reframe that where it becomes kind of a devotion, a devotional practice, because if I'm feeling scattered, if I'm feeling a little unmoored, I know that if I spend 30 minutes cleaning, I will have some satisfaction, fulfillment, and there will be something that is evident from that bout of work that is rewarding in a way that other activities might not be as I'm moving through the day. So I think it's a wonderful place to bring mindfulness into. It's a hard sell to 4 kids. You might not be able to do it that way with your kids, but it's something to play with and explore.
Definitely. And like you said, that sense of satisfaction, sense of fulfillment, energetically, just organizing spaces, clearing the clutter, removing from our lives what doesn't serve us is just so incredibly powerful. So that is something that I do like to incorporate on a daily basis too. So great suggestion. Thank you. What I'd love to do now is dive more deeply into meditation, because I think that this can be such a daunting thought, sometimes such a daunting practice before people really dive in and start to explore it. I know for me, I had some hesitation. I thought I was worried. I was judging myself before I even started. I thought, well, I don't know that I'm going to do this right. And even when I started, truth be told, the first couple times I tried to meditate, I'm thinking this is supposed to be this wonderful Zen-like peaceful practice, and I'm supposed to walk out feeling like, Buddha. And I was downright cranky after the first couple times I tried to meditate because I couldn't sit still, and all of these thoughts were just flooding my mind, and I was trying to push them away, and I walked out feeling more stressed than I went in. And I know that obviously I was doing a lot of things, incorrectly. I mean, I was judging myself. I was going in with expectations. But for that, can you talk a little bit about what is the best way to start a meditation practice?
Sure, and I'm really glad you brought that up because what your experience is so normal. And there are a lot of misconceptions about what mindfulness is and what meditation is. And as mindfulness has moved into the popular culture, sometimes that word gets conflated with other words like calmness. And it can be a setup for people thinking that they're not doing it right or that they're failing. And so I'd like to start just with a definition. There are many definitions. The way I've been defining it recently is that mindfulness is the awareness that arises when we pay attention in the present moment with an attitude of openness, balance, and non-reactivity. And so we cultivate that stance of intention through the practice of meditation. And meditation is really a training of attention and of a specific skill set, one of concentration, sensory clarity, and equanimity. Now, concentration is the ability to focus on things. Sensory clarity is the ability to know what's happening when it's happening. So knowing what you're thinking, what you're feeling in your body, what emotions might be arising, and tracking that in real time. And then equanimity is this capacity not to be pushed or pulled by your experience. And so when you sit down in meditation, you may or may not be calm at all. And that's not a problem. In fact, that's good because we want to see what's arising and learn to work with that in a way that is kind and wise. And so it's a total misnomer to think that mindfulness means you will always be calm. I have been absolutely outraged and been mindful of my outrage. That's actually good to be aware that you're in that state. Now, what can happen is that you can become calm through the practice of meditation and by practicing mindfulness. It's a little bit like going to the gym. If you went to the gym and you were lifting weights or running on the treadmill, you will get fit. The fitness is a byproduct of doing the activity in the gym. So calmness is a byproduct of the practice of mindfulness and meditation, but it doesn't have to exist within that practice. You can be absolutely irritated, frustrated, your mind can be disheveled, all of that. And yet you're still practicing and cultivating these skills. So that's really important to clarify. Also important to clarify that you cannot and will not clear your mind in meditation. You will have thoughts. The mouth waters, the eyes blink, the mind thinks. What can and does happen over time is that your relationship to those thoughts change. So you tend not to get as agitated. You tend to allow them to move more freely through the sky of your mind. If we use that metaphor, like clouds moving through the sky of your mind, and you're not as entangled in them. Even the difficult ones, the intensity and the duration in which your entanglement exists over time becomes less and less. And that is what grants us a lot of ease. Over time, we're not so entangled with what is arising because we've had practice sitting with it. I think your comment of needing to be kind is really, really important, because we are not going to be, if we are using the breath as an object of our focus, we will not be on the breath 100% of the time. And that's okay. The movement away from that object of focus in a meditation is helpful. It gives us something to work with. We're working with our thoughts, we're working with sensations, we're working with our emotions, and we're also attempting to stabilize our attention around the breath. If we didn't have that activity in a sitting, it would be, using the gym metaphor again, a little bit like going to the gym and there would be no equipment to lift, to get fit, or to work out on. So it's actually helpful to have some thoughts in meditation, to have some sensations, to have some feelings, and learn how to relate to them with some kindness, some equanimity, some compassion, and also stabilize the attention on the breath. In other words, returning to that object of focus that you've chosen for your meditation.
Super helpful. Thank you. I wish I had all of this knowledge before I started, because I wouldn't have been so hard on myself. But
yeah, well, I think I spent the first 5 years beating myself up for not doing it right. And by the way, I think some neuroscience is informative here. We know now through neuroimaging that the resting state of the brain is quite active. For years, neuroscientists weren't really interested in what the brain was doing at rest. But now we know that the brain is kind of scanning, planning, darting, it's ruminating, it's thinking. That's the natural resting state of the brain. When I learned that, I felt so much better about my own mind and my own brain, because I realized, well, this is just the way the brain works. And so I don't have to fight with it. I don't have to become embattled. I can accept it, and at the same time, develop this concentration skill around the breath or sound or noticing sensation in the body. And so that's sort of very relieving to me when I found that out. It might be relieving to some of your listeners to know that as well.
Absolutely. And when people meditate, do you suggest that they find a particular spot that they meditate regularly, or is this something that they can do in different environments? And what would the ideal environment look like?
I think it's different for everyone, but we know in terms of habit formation, sometimes cues are very helpful. So setting up a spot and going to that spot as your meditation place can kind of create an association that's very helpful in the formation of a habit. The mind and the body are very associative. So you generally want a place that's quiet, where you won't be interrupted. 20 years ago, I sat on the floor. I don't do that anymore. I sit in a nice chair, one that has a back to it that's fairly upright. So an office chair is kind of good. If you're lying down, or if you're in a chair that's too comfortable, it might induce some sleep. So adopting a posture that supports your alert yet relaxed attention. Depending, some people like to bring in things that inspire them, whether that's a statue or a candle or literature or, a chime, anything like that. I've had students who've been very adaptive and practical. I had a student who would meditate in his car. And, it was really a perfect environment, because the seat, he could, move the back to a way where he was upright. It's kind of like a little sound booth in the car. And what he would do is he would pull into the driveway and he would meditate for about 5 minutes before he went into the house. And at first his family was like, "What's Dad doing out there?" And then he would come in and, he would have unwound a bit, and they enjoyed his presence. And they got to know when he hadn't meditated, because he would come into the house with a different energy, and they say, "Dad, go back out to the car." So I think you can be flexible and adaptive, and that goes for the time of day you do it as well. Sometimes people like to do it in the morning. Sometimes, like you're a busy mom. You're also got a business that you're managing. So that probably doesn't work for you. It doesn't work for me. I do it in the nighttime and in the evening. So you can play with that as well. And short times, many times. If you just were to do 5 minutes or a minute, that would be a real success, and then build on that.
Okay, 5 minutes or a minute. Start off with that, like once a day, or how many times a day would you suggest?
Yeah, I think the consistency is what's key here. So, if you could do it multiple times a day, great. But if you could do it once a day and then do that consistently, the SpaceX rocket just launched not long ago. And my understanding, I'm not a rocket scientist, but my understanding is most of the fuel in a rocket launch is spent in that first 5-10 seconds of the launch. Once it's out in orbit, it takes very little momentum to keep it going. So I say this as a metaphor because you can launch your practice if you are consistent in the beginning Don't worry about how long you're doing it, but if you're doing it consistently and you launch yourself into that habit, then maintaining it becomes far easier. You're kind of drafting on the momentum you've created. So I always emphasize the consistency with my students. Just give yourself a commitment. I think for me, 30 days, 60 days, where you're all in and you say, I'm going to do this as a project for the next 60 days. We actually know now habit adaptation has a longer range than just that month period. But, if you want to do a month, I'm all in. I'm going to do this. This is my commitment to myself to do it 5 minutes a day, every day. And then after 30 days, review. Did it make a difference to you? Because you are your own laboratory. You will know. And maybe it doesn't, maybe it's not your thing. But if you give it that amount of room and that amount of commitment and intention, you might discover that it's a game changer.
Absolutely. So let's talk about your role as a teacher. Do you work with individuals? Do you teach classes? Let's talk about a little bit about what you do on a daily basis.
So I teach classes. I'm teaching quite a bit on Zoom now. I work with a lot of different populations. I also coach individually. And I had always wanted in my teaching to go to the places where mindfulness wasn't. So for me, initially, that was going into schools. There wasn't a lot of mindfulness there. Now, mindfulness in education is really thriving. I've wanted to go into corporate settings and even law firms because that's a very highly stressed profession. And they weren't initially getting a lot of meditation, but that profession too has become one of the early adopters of mindfulness and meditation. So my intention was going into areas where mindfulness really wasn't available. And I still follow that as kind of an axiom. So going into secular settings and teaching, now doing a lot online, which actually has been a wonderful surprise because, you can reach people all over the world. And the connection is robust, and it's really, I think, going to explode the availability of not only mindfulness, but other healing modalities.
Definitely. And it's so needed now more than ever with all of the external stressors in our world that we haven't been used to dealing with in the past, in addition to just the everyday stressors of normal life that we're accustomed to. I think people have a lot of weight on their shoulders right now, and the more and more we can incorporate mindfulness, meditation, healthy, holistic practices into our life. You mentioned eating, setting the intentionality. That will help us to manage all of this stress in our life in a much healthier way. And I can tell how much, you were so aligned with your passion and your purpose and your profession. It's all just in perfect alignment because I can see how much it lights you up, and I can tell that you get back as much as you put into it. And I feel like whenever we have that alignment of passion, purpose, and profession, that's a continuous energy loop that just never stops. We just keep pouring ourselves into it, and it just keeps giving back to us. And that said, I'm curious, what is the most rewarding aspect of what you do for you?
Well, there are so many. I'm really enjoying writing now and communicating through that medium. And, intellectually, that's a challenge for me to take some of these concepts and make them really understandable and usable for people. I think clearly in a class, when someone has an insight around their own behavior or is able to use these techniques and tools in a way that fundamentally shifts their behavior, and not only that, is able to be of service to people around them, it's incredibly fulfilling and uplifting. Working with kids, I was on a Zoom class working with kids the other day, and I taught a simple practice that was a breathing practice. I always, with kids, ask, well, how would you use this? And a little, 9-year-old boy say, well, when I have thoughts that really bother me, what I call bad thoughts, I think I'll start breathing. And you never know if you're going to be the first or last stone on someone's path, but I certainly did not have those tools or awareness when I was 9. And it took me a long time to get to a place where I could even become aware of them. So for me, it's incredibly meaningful that someone is able to use a tool, make a link in their life as to how they might use it, or has an insight that changes their orientation or view of the world. All of it, frankly, is pretty rewarding.
Yeah, there is no better feeling than knowing that you've touched the life of an individual in a positive way. You're doing that obviously every day, all day. So I'm
That's
so
our you.
grateful.
That's
Thank
our you.
you. Thank you very much. I do love what I do. I always say I never describe what I do as work. No aspect of it feels like work. I feel like I'm serving, and there's really nothing else that I'd rather be doing. So you do such an amazing job of serving those around you and helping to institute healthy lifestyle practices. And again, such a needed practice, especially in this day and age with so many stressors around us.
You know, and
Go
I
ahead.
just touch on that I think is meaningful is that, you don't have to teach or you don't have to be expansive to have an incredible impact. If you start practicing something and do it regularly and it begins to change you, others around you notice. For example, my sister, she started meditating because I was meditating. Now, I never said anything to her. I never said, hey, you should try this. Never. It's
Mhm.
just she saw that I was changing in a positive way. And so she began to practice. Actually, I just finished up an 8-week class series. She was one of the students in it, as was her husband. So you never know when you begin something how much that changes and affects people around you. So just beginning something positive for yourself, you don't have to have a podcast or write or teach. That is very profound.
Right, absolutely. I will wholeheartedly echo that because people do observe. We can lead just by example, just by allowing other people to just observe what we're doing, and it is contagious when we make these investments in ourselves in any aspect, mind, body, or spirit. That has an effect on our vibration. That has an effect on our vibe. That has an effect on the spring in our step. That has an effect on our aura. And people want to be part of that. They want to know, how do I get there? Right? How can I step into that energy? And so they will automatically start to emulate some of the behaviors that we display, and in some of the energies that we embody. So I think that's just so important, that you can change the world just by virtue of making small adjustments in your daily life.
Yeah, I'm sure with your 4 kids, they've obviously been watching you, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're doing some of the things that you're doing without you even telling them what you're doing.
Absolutely. I mean, I look at, you commented on, a lot of 9-year-olds, just don't have, that kind of that breathing, that awareness to go to their breath. I mean, I look at my 9-year-old, my youngest is 9, and the things she knows, I mean, she's just, again, about everything having to do with mind, body, and spirit wellness. She's whipping up healthy recipes in the kitchen. And I'm thinking how different my life would have been if I would have known all of this all along. And just, she's really good at reframing, about, well, this is what we could learn from this. And the other day I said to her, are you a life coach? Because I may hire you one day. And it's
I know.
amazing though.
It's amazing when the kids are, more emotionally intelligent than you are.
Oh,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
that's not uncommon nowadays because
Right.
of, I think this generation is very, very aware and will change the world because of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, babies are being born more conscious now than they were. I mean, I look back at my childhood and I was so sheltered and naive, and, I just didn't have the level of awareness. This is stuff that I had to develop along the way through my life experiences. But I feel like future generations will just be that much further along because they are starting off with a higher level of awareness to begin with. So, well, thank
Agreed.
you. I'm so grateful that you have taken time to be on my podcast today and share all of your vast knowledge and wisdom. Before we wrap up, we've got another couple minutes here. Did you want to share any final words of knowledge, wisdom, encouragement, whatever you'd like to call them, with our viewers and listeners?
Well, I think if anyone's been curious about meditation or mindfulness, it's a terrific time to start now. I mean, we're at home physically, we're kind of still sheltering. Many people are changing their routines. So there's an availability to begin in terms of personal time. There also are a lot of resources, many, many resources now being offered free to help people cope with the additional stressors. So if anyone's ever been curious, dive in now. It's a great time to start. And I would encourage them to give it a little bit of time. Meditation, mindfulness is not a quick fix, but it's a profound one. So I would just encourage people to explore, to begin, and see how it impacts them. It may not be for them, but it's a great time to begin, I think.
I totally agree. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you again for being on my show today. If anyone would like to get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, they can go on my website, www.kelly, K-E-L-L-Y, kellybarron.com, BARRON.com. So kellybarron.com. They can sign up for my my newsletter on my website. I am not aggressive with that. I hopefully give good content. They can always unsubscribe if they don't like it. That's also a way that they can learn about classes and offerings that I have. And so that's a good way. They can also find other resources on the website too if they're interested in books and learning about it through podcasts. Lots of great resources. So yeah, I'd be happy if they found me that way.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that and for being a guest on my show today. It has been a delightful conversation. And I would also like to thank all of our viewers and listeners for being here. Time is a choice, and I am so grateful that you have carved time out of your day to be here and listen to all of Kelly's knowledge and wisdom that she has shared with us. Once again, I would love to invite you to join our Facebook community. We can be found at liveauthentically.today/FB. And again, check out PamelaSavino.com for more information on my book, Soar. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.